Lord's answer to the remembrancer's prayer. Remember in chapter 64, the remembrancer was praying. The remembrancer is someone who has been posted to be in continual prayer to keep the Lord's attention, so that we urge him, we do not forget him, we stay busy asking him to do what only he can do. The remembrancer is important, and that's part of who we are to be in this time frame. If you'll back up to 35,000 feet here, we're between the work of the servant, the work of Jesus on the cross. As we walk through the book of Isaiah, we've already passed that point. As we walk through history, world history, we've already passed that point. That's it. It's a matter of history. It's why our faith is what it is. We trust Christianity because we know a man who died and was raised from the dead. That's a matter of history. That's happened in our past. He's also promised that he's coming back again. That's not happened yet. That's something in our future. So here we are, you and I, living in the place in time, between when the servant came and when he's coming back. And what are we to do in the meantime? That's what the remembrancer is there for. That's his question to the Lord. That's his motivation for continuing to pray. And so the remembrancer, his prayer has finished now at the end of chapter 64. As we walk through the book of Isaiah, we're now at the point where the remembrancer's prayer is over and God is responding to that prayer. These last two chapters come from the throne of God. They are God's answer to the prayer. We have watched, and it is not going well. And so our prayer is pretty heartfelt. We long to see God do what he's promised to do. But you and I are still living in this world where not only do we sin, but all those around us are sinners. The creation itself is fallen. We have hurricanes, we have termites, cockroaches, mosquitoes, cancer. This is a fallen world, and we've lived in it our whole lives. And so we're okay. We know about cancer. We don't like what it does. But I don't very often pray, Lord, make cancer go away. But don't we wish he would? That's what we're praying for. We want what God has promised in the future. We want our world, not only the creation, to be redeemed, but I want to be made like Jesus. I want my resurrection body. Someday, I'm going to be able to see. I'm going to be able to hear. My joints won't ache. I won't wake up in the middle of the night with a lower back pain. My hands won't trouble me if I spend a little too much time with a shovel in them the day before. There's a lot of things that need to get fixed. And there's only one person that can fix it. And so we've prayed. The remembrancer has prayed. His prayer is our prayer. He prays what we need to pray. And so now, as we walk through these last two chapters, I want you to hear it as God sitting on his throne, speaking to you as a remembrancer. That's what these last two chapters are. This is God's answer to our longing for this world to get straightened out. God gives us his answer here. That's pretty good news. I really want to hear what God has to say. And that's what these last two chapters are. This is straight from the mouth of God. And so it's got my attention. So last week we walked through this beginning stuff here. I want to repeat this last bullet item here. George said it was important. And so if George thought it was important, maybe I ought to pay more attention to it. The final section of the prophecy of Isaiah, that's this last third of the book. We've been talking about it being in 3 parts ever since we started, presents the implications of the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's God saying what it will mean when Jesus comes again. Just as chapters 1 through 37 offered implications of his birth. Remember the first part of the book of Isaiah? Isaiah is watching the Davidic dynasty fail. He knows that these guys are getting worse and worse as we go. I don't know how relevant you think that is, but in my lifetime, I've watched things go from Eisenhower to Joe Biden. And as I think about each of those along the way, Democrat or Republican, it doesn't seem to matter. Our leadership is less and less and less leaders, heartbreakingly so, I think. So chapters 1 through 37 offer implications concerning his birth, the coming of Jesus, the coming to the earth. Remember, we need a king, a righteous king. The Davidic dynasty is dying. That's the kings of the kingdom, they're failing. So we need a king to replace the kings that are failing. We need a king who is righteous. And 1 through 37 promises we'll have a king who will be righteous and who will reign over a righteous people. Well, if you're Isaiah's people and you're walking in the desert, looking back at the smoke rising from Jerusalem, and you know you're there because your king has failed you, and you know you're there because you're a nation of sinners. It's hard to look back there and look at that column of smoke and feel like there's a righteous king coming who's going to reign over a righteous people in that place. That's part of the promise too. It's always going to be Mount Zion. Whatever the whole world says about what's going on right now in Israel, whatever the whole world says about that, however divided we might be, in the end, Jesus Christ is going to sit on a throne in that city, Jerusalem, on that Mount Zion, and that's the way it's going to be. That's a fact. That's where history's headed. I want to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, whether or not it fits my politics, whether or not it fits the way I see how the world ought to be. I want to pray for the peace of Jerusalem because my righteous king's going to sit on a throne there, and I hope to be a resident of that city. I don't care how many people defy government or act in ways, protest in ways that agree or disagree with my politics. God has said Jesus is going to sit on a throne in that city, and it's going to happen, guys. God doesn't fail to get done what he says he's going to do. And so my prayer is going to be that God's will gets done in all of this, that we get quickly to the place where we can have a rapture and we get an end to the sickness that has infested all of creation that we know. I want it to end at this point. I want it over with. And so I'm anxious to hear how God answers these prayers. When we outline this section, the center of our outline, as is the case when we see this kind of an outline. Do you see what I mean when I say this kind of an outline? It works toward its center, and each bullet point on each side answers the bullet point from previously. The bullet point here is those who forsake the Lord and follow cults are destined for slaughter. This bullet point answers that one. Those who have chosen their own way and their improper worship. Those who are in cults are those who have chosen their own way and are engaged in improper worship. Do you see that these two bullet points correspond to each other? In each case, this preserved remnant, the glorious future of the miracle children of Zion, that's who the remnant is those glorious people. The Lord's retribution on those who have rebelled, judgment on those who follow cults. Do you see that each bullet point above answers to the corresponding bullet point below? That's always the case in these outlines that physically look like this. When I make the outline so that there's a center point, there's nothing that answers the center point, is there? It is its own point, and it is the point of, it is the central truth of this entire outline. And the outline is the last two chapters. So the central point of the last two chapters of the book of Isaiah, the central point of God's answer to the prayer of the remembrancer, the central point of what God wants to say in response to the prayer, to our prayer, is this: there is going to be joy for the Lord's servants in the new creation. I wish it was joy in this creation, but it's not. And I feel like I'm watching my part of this creation rot, if you will, decline. But God's answer is, our future is secure. Our future is in heaven. Our future is being with Jesus face to face and being like him. Our future is we are going to be the glory of God as seen by all created beings throughout eternity. The church, the existence of the church in heaven, is what will bring glory to God for all eternity. I'm going to struggle and suffer, Jesus said. In this world, you will have tribulation. Hard not to think that's true. But take heart, live big-hearted, live lion-hearted, Jesus said, because I have overcome the world. God's telling me my Christianity is bigger than this world. My Christianity has to go beyond my death in this world and the grave. My Christianity has to go to the part where my body comes out of that grave, rises in the air to meet Jesus, and rules with him eternally, forever. That's my hope. My hope isn't something I wish for. My hope is an assured confidence about what my future is. I know that I'm going to stand face to face with Jesus and I'm going to be like him. That's my hope. And it isn't because I wish for it that it's my hope. It's my hope because God has promised it. Let go of that definition of hope that you and I have in our English language, that our language has given to us. This biblical hope isn't like the hope you and I think of when we hear the word hope. Our biblical hope is not something we wish for. It's something that has been promised to us, and therefore I can be confident that it will come to pass. I'm confident I have that hope because God has promised it, not because I wish for it. That isn't what my hope is about, my biblical hope. My biblical hope is about God's promise that this is my future. In Isaiah's day, God promised that there would come one who would die on a cross and his death would pay for my sins. That's a pretty big promise. And yet, when I look at history, didn't God get just exactly that done? And hasn't all of history since then looked back not only at the promise, but at its fulfillment and said, my God's big enough. My God's big enough to get that done. He's also big enough to get me face to face with Jesus. I have a hope that isn't a wish for the future. I have a hope that's a promise for my future. I can look at that and say with confident assurance, I know I'm going to stand face to face with Jesus. I know I'm going to be like him. I know that's going to last for eternity. That's my hope. All those things that I know are my confident assurance. The things that I know are my hope.
It's interesting that you use the word hope, and in that word is the hint of doubt as we use it in everyday language.
Yeah.
But the biblical concept of hope is perfect assurance.
That's what that's why an English teacher is here, guys, because he can say just exactly what he said and not use all the 10,000 words I just used. It's exactly right. Our look at the word hope has some potential for not coming to pass, but our biblical hope does not have that potential. Our biblical hope is assured. Thank you, Deke.
Earthly hope has built-in failure.
Yeah, built in the possibility.
My woolly worm would get to the top. So did everybody else.
So, as the Lord begins to speak here in chapter 65, verse 1, this is God speaking from the throne, answering our prayer. He says, I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. Think about the implications of just that statement. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, here I am. Repetition. And guys, in the Hebrew of those two things, here I am, before I say the Hebrew, hear the word I am, the two words I am. What the Hebrew says there is, behold me, behold me. And I've told you over and over again about that word, behold. It's God saying, here is your hope. Here, I'm the one who can redeem you. I'm your Goel. I'm your Savior. I'm the one who can get you past this world. God says from the throne, I have been saying, behold me, behold me. I am the one ready to be found by those who wouldn't seek me, by those who wouldn't look for me. And so God is starting his answer to the remembrancer by saying, everybody's had a chance. I've not been hiding myself. To the contrary, I've said, behold me. This is self-revelation intended for those outside the bounds of Israel. It's self-revelation for those who are Gentiles, in other words. That's me. That's God saying to me, if you didn't respond to me, it's on you, because I've always been here waiting for you to turn. Yikes. That's how God starts his answer to the prayer of the remembrancer. God wanted to bring the Gentiles to himself as much as he wanted to bring Israel into his embrace. And that's how chapter 60, verse 10 and following, that's what it's about. It's about God having already reached out to the Gentiles. So that first verse is there all by itself as a piece of God's answer to the prayer of the remembrancer. Moving on then to verses 2 through 7, these verses are about a pleading, a provocation, and a reaction. They describe a corrupt popular religion that existed in Isaiah's day and likely on into the exile and the post-exilic timeframes. And I want to say to you, far beyond Israel, this is the story of mankind. This is the problem that mankind has. So God says, I spread out my hands all the day to a rebellious people who walk in a way that is not good, following their own devices. In all your ways acknowledge him. But no, we don't. So this phrase, this type that's pictured here, the phrase, spread out my hands, you know what that looks like because we keep talking about the Pharisees doing it. Mm-hmm. They spread out their hands to pray. It's how Israel prayed in the past. Now the picture here is of God saying to us, I spread out my hands. Is there something wrong with the picture of God pleading with us by spreading out his hands? Hadn't it ought to be just the opposite? We ought to be pleading with him with our hands outspread. This is a picture of a God who has done far beyond anything we should expect, far beyond anything we could call for him to do. This is a God who has abased himself by being born in a barn, being nursed in a stable, having diaper rash on a bed of straw. This is a God who came and people spit on him and pulled his beard out and hung him on a cross and killed him. This is a God who has spread out his hands, isn't it? This is a God who has pled with us in every way we can imagine, and yet we refuse to see. This is God's answer to the prayer of the remembrancer. I've spread out my hands to a rebellious people. So how absolutely backward is it to picture the Lord with his hands spread out? These people are described as rebellious to the point that it was evident in their lifestyles. They walk in a way that is not good. They are rebellious to the point they chose their own ways as opposed to God's ways. God continues, I've spread out my hands to a people who provoke me to my face continually, sacrificing in gardens and making offerings on bricks. Now, God's talking to Israel here. This has been an issue all through the whole Old Testament. Where do you make your sacrifices? Well, Israel, once the two nations were split, Israel and Judah, forever they have had this problem of sacrificing to Molech on the mountaintops or to Baal on the mountaintops. It wasn't by accident that our prophet went up on Mount Carmel to the top of the mountain and said to Baal's prophets, okay, we're up here where you guys worship. We're up here on the top of the mountain. So call out to your God. This is where you go to call out to your God. Call out to your God. Let's see him do something. Let's see what he can do when you call out to him. Now there's 450 of you. That's a pretty good group. Call out to your God. Let's see if he's awake today. Let's see if he's at work or on vacation. Let's see what he's doing. Okay? And they cut themselves and they danced and they circled their wagons and they did everything they knew how to do. And what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. God says, we soaked the wood, we dug a trench so we can keep the water there. We did everything we can do to prevent God from lighting this fire on fire. And God just lit the fire. I've done everything I can, God keeps saying. To my face, the words, these people who provoked him, to my face pictures taking an action in the presence of one who has declared that it is forbidden. I'm telling you, the judge says, you will not do that. And in that moment, the one who's told you will not do that does it. I mean, it's just spitting in his eye. And that's how we've treated God. And that's the God who has, in the meantime, spread out his hands to plead with us. So they've sacrificed in gardens, they've made brick offerings or made offerings on bricks. The Old Testament, well, we'll get there. To my face pictures that action. Continually, they've done this, they've provoked God continually. And remember what about him with his hands spread out? All day. So their continually is the same as his pleading all day. While he stands there all day pleading, they stand there all day spitting in his eye. That's a picture we don't, it sort of turns our stomach, doesn't it? It makes us queasy. It makes us, ooh, I hate that. Sacrificing in gardens pictures the slaughter of the sacrifice in a place where it is forbidden. Going back to Isaiah 129, they shall be ashamed of the oaks that you desired. Isaiah is talking about his people. When he talks about the oaks that you desired, he's talking about those mountaintop places where they went to make their sacrifices. This is the worship of Baal. This is the worship of Molech. This is the worship of all those idols. And God is saying to Isaiah, you shall blush for the gardens that you have chosen. You will be ashamed of what you have done. This is God speaking to us. So making offerings on bricks is also forbidden. If you make me an altar of stone, clear back in Exodus this is, if you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. So are we able to make bricks that aren't profaned? Yes. As soon as we touch it, we profane it. As soon as we make it the way we know to make it, we have ruined it.
Doesn't make much hope.
That's ugly, isn't it? That really is. You shall not go up on steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed. This is directions to the priesthood in the Old Testament. So Isaiah begins his condemnation at the point at which obedience would have been very easy. It's easy not to worship on these places that are forbidden. Just don't go there. That's not a hard thing, is it? Just don't go there. And when you worship, do it on an altar that's made of my stones that you haven't ruined by chiseling them and shaping them the way you want. My stones are already the way I want them. Leave them alone. How hard is it to leave something alone? Could we have done that? This is not a grand act of obedience to just leave the stones alone. Pick them up and put them on to build your altar, but don't mess with them. That's not hard, is it? That's not a hard command. That should have been easy. And yet sometimes the easy commands seem less important to us, don't they? the thing that comes to my mind right there is just, it's troubled me my whole adult life. I'm a football fan. I've watched most of every single Super Bowl in my lifetime. I don't miss the Super Bowl. I go to some lengths to watch football. I love the game. I just do, and I'm sorry. I know some of you could care less. I love the game. I keep struggling with this notion of what I ought to be doing on Sunday because it's my day of worship. I keep inviting Jesus to watch the game with me.
I love that.
You could zoom in on the church.
It ought not to be that hard for me to just turn that TV off. So the Lord goes on and he talks about these people who sit in tombs and spend the night in secret places, who eat pig's flesh, and broth of tainted meat is in their vessels. So God has continued to reach out. Don't look at me like that, Chris. The Lord knows what I am. So the condemnation continues by picturing rebels seeking revelation in inappropriate places. Is it okay to ask the witch? Is it okay to ask the necromancer, the one who seeks the words from the dead? Is it okay to ask them? How'd that work out for Saul? It ought not to be that hard not to go there to look for answers, to get needs. Sit in tombs and spend the night in secret places. That's what you do when you're seeking revelation through necromancy and fortune telling and all of those stuff. Deuteronomy 18:10, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering. That's what they did when they worshiped Molech. They sacrificed their firstborn, burned them on an altar. It's hard to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine any parent able to do that. It takes my breath away, the depth of our ability to get wrong.
Yeah, you know what, it makes you think of what we're seeing and happening with Hamas, those victims in Israel. You know, here they did the children and so on. Yeah, look what man was doing clear back at that time. I mean, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
That evil.
Right.
Yep. So in addition, the Lord condemns the practice of ignoring the food regulations. We got pig's flesh and tainted meat.
Does that mean we shouldn't eat barbecue?
We've had Peter's had that revelation from heaven.
Okay.
Please don't take my barbecue. That's what I have when I'm watching the football game. When Jesus is over at my house watching one day, we have pig's flesh.
Watching football and eating barbecue.
American
Ah. So these people who say, keep to yourself, do not come near me, for I am too holy for you. That's a real heartbreaking moment here. Most of the world outside the church that you and I attend, and I don't mean Mount Calvary, I mean the big C, capital C church. Most of the people out there see us as holier than thou. They think we have the attitude that we are holier than thou. The truth is, some of us do have that attitude. We got to get over it. Part of the reason that things are going the way they are in our kingdom, in our dynasty, is that we have not humbled ourselves and prayed and turned from our wicked ways and sought God. That's 2 Corinthians 7:14. That's the first part of it. And it's directed at God's people. It's not directed at non-believers. It's directed at you and I. It says, humble yourselves and pray and turn from your wicked ways and seek my face. The implication of the verse is that we have failed to do that. It was spoken to Israel because they had failed to do that. And what God said to them in the second half of that verse is, then I will heal from heaven and turn to you. I will hear from heaven and turn and heal your land. We need to hear those words. I don't know if it's too late for us to do that or not. I would love for us to do that and try to find out. So these things, says God, are a smoke in my nostrils, a fire that burns all the day. I'm particularly important for me to hear that this morning because we have a cookout in our neighborhood every year on Woolly Worm Day, so that we can all just stay there and not have to go out into the traffic. And as we stood around the fire, the wind kept switching directions, and I had a fair amount of smoke in my nostrils trying to cook those 2 hot dogs on the end of my stick. It's not pleasant when you get that smoke in your nostrils. It's an uncomfortable, unfriendly thing. God says we do it to him all day long. What's pictured here is a form of pseudo-holiness that stands aloof from others and creates divisions which have no place in God's word. I go to a Sunday school class, and we were talking yesterday morning about something that has the potential to divide us, and it's the view of the rapture. All of end times studies are used by our enemy to divide us. When we argue about whether the rapture takes place before the tribulation or after, when we argue about when Jesus' millennial reign takes place, when we write whole books to argue our position, and when we have church splits. There was somebody in my Sunday school class that said she used to attend a church that split because of end times views. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. So all the day, these smoke in God's nostrils, which goes on all the day, is an inclusio with the beginning of this little section here, verses 2 through 7.